Michelle is the host. So for the first 10 minutes will be introduction. Michelle will talk about the project Beyond and Beyond campaign. And then the premiere starts at 6:10. So when it starts at 6:10, I'm going to share it here, but it will be live. If you want a better quality of viewership, you will have to go to YouTube and watch it from YouTube. So, but I'll put it here for the sake of the guys who are watching on Facebook. Okay? So I will live stream it. I will live stream it here on here. So that is what's going to happen. But and then after that, we come back for the discussion. All of you guys have gotten questions from Michelle. Michelle is the moderator, and we are going on live in 2 minutes. So if you are going to put an extra makeup, an extra layer of lipstick, please, if you're lipstick demon, if you're
my hair brush. Do I have any hair before?
So we are going live fresh here. You have refused us to see your face. So we start in the next 1 minute. Michelle, you are ready, right? So I'm just going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, go, right? And then I'm going to share the link of the live stream on the WhatsApp groups, all the 6 of them. Okay.
The introductions are going to be for the panelists only, isn't it?
Yeah, for the panelists only, yes.
So the order will be Anita, Eva, Damon, then so follow the order tafadhali.
Oh, we start with Uganda, then we come to Kenya.
By the Annette is joining. I can't see anybody from Uganda. Damon happened. I don't know. Damon is disappeared. Damon, he's looking
for disappeared.
Oh, you are putting makeup. Oh, sorry.
I'm here.
So we go live.
My little boy is doing my makeup.
Oh no. Yes, I need makeup. You see my skin is doing what?
Or a wig.
Michelle, come to my
I'll be a moderator for the day. My name is Michelle Koinange, and I'm the coordinator of Stop the Traffic Kenya. So before we begin the launch or the session, I'm going to allow some of our panelists to introduce themselves in anticipation of the event we're having this evening. So I'll start with Mr. Damon Mamara from Dwelling Places. He's the country director of Dwelling Places and an important part of the session we're having this evening. Damon? Kindly unmute your microphone.
Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here and good to be in this conversation. Excited to talk about the issue and how we can engage with it at regional level. Damon Omara is my name. I am currently the country director of Dwelling Places. Dwelling Places works with children who come to the streets and who are brought to the streets for purposes of exploitation and others who migrate unsafely, including children who are trafficked. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damon. Anita, then Eva.
Good evening, viewers. My name is Anita Nyanjong, and I am the regional coordinator for the Eastern African Child Rights Network, otherwise known as ESCRN. The ESCRN is a membership organization of national child rights organizations within the Eastern African region. And we do advocacy on children's rights, particularly within the African regional level. Thank you and welcome.
Eva, over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening, everybody. My name is Eva Ruria. I'm the program manager for the Coalition on Violence Against Women. The Coalition on Violence Against Women works towards supporting and ensuring that communities and women exist within safe areas and where there is no form of violation in any way. COVAO also works in partnership with Teredes Homes, which is the lead partner for the Girl Advocacy Alliance project and program here in Kenya. And we focus on programs that look at elimination of CSEC, child trafficking, as well as elimination of child marriage interventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I'll just give a brief overview of what we're doing this evening. We are going to watch a documentary. It's 20 minutes long. We're going to then have a brief discussion afterwards where you can share some of your thoughts and questions based on what you watch. We'll also have a panel discussion where we'll ask the panelists some of the preset questions. And as we go through this session, I'd invite you to use the chat function or use the comments depending on where you're watching us from, and kindly share your questions, comments, and feedback. All this should be done, but hopefully by 7:30. So we don't want to keep you here for a long time, and we do appreciate you taking the time to join us. This session is made possible thanks to partners of the Girls Advocacy Alliance. As Eva has mentioned, it is implemented by partners such as Teredes Homes, Plan, ECPAT, and ECPAT. So we will kind of endeavor to have such webinars throughout the month of July, which this is going to be in anticipation of the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, which will be hosted on 30th of July. So we will have a lot of time to get comfortable with each other and learn more about human trafficking and kind of build our understanding of child trafficking as well as CSEC. Thank you and welcome. Enjoy the next 20 minutes. See you after.
Thank you. The video premieres in about 7 minutes. So I think, Anita, you need to speak a little bit more about the work of the TDH around child trafficking and the work that you guys are doing across the Eastern Africa.
Okay, thanks very much, Jennifer. Yes, so the ESCRN, Eastern Africa Child Rights Network, is being supported by Teredes Homes, as well as the Girls Advocacy Alliance, which is an alliance of organizations, international organizations that are supporting advocacy on Africa. So we are one of the partners of the Girls Advocacy Alliance since last year. And our focus has been on ending child trafficking. We have been working towards ensuring that the East Africa Human Trafficking Bill, adopted by the East Africa Legislative Assembly. We've also been working with the committee of experts on the rights and welfare of the child towards addressing trafficking in the context of migration. The committee having launched about a year or 2 years ago the report on children on the move. We've also been working in Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia, working with civil society organizations, building capacity on addressing human trafficking, particularly child trafficking. And we've also worked with policy actors within this country, particularly Uganda, because the mover of the East Africa trafficking bill at the East Africa Legislative Assembly, the private members bill. So we have also been working with the member of parliament, the representative of Uganda to the IALA Assembly towards ensuring that the bill is adopted. So we have been working with them, a cross-section of actors at the policy level, as well as NGOs such as Stop the Traffic, UCATIP in Uganda, and other NGOs in Ethiopia. So that has been part of our work around advocacy on ending child trafficking in the region. I may also want to add that we've also worked very closely with the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, towards developing a child protection policy that looks into issues and looks into addressing child trafficking and child sexual exploitation, particularly within the context of IGAD. So that has been our focus, ESCR. And apart from that, we also do work on other areas. We work broadly on children's rights. We build capacity of organizations. As I mentioned, we have networks across Eastern Africa who work on various issues involving children. But our mandate really is on advocacy. So our focus is at the Committee on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, where we also are part of the secretariat of that committee, together with the Child Rights Network of Southern Africa. So, that is, in a nutshell, what the ESCRN is about. Jennifer, back to you.
But I will talk. So Eva, probably you can talk what Girls Advocacy Alliance is doing in Kenya, and then Simon can for 2 minutes each, because we are like 4 minutes. For 1 minute, I think we start with Eva, and then Damon is going to talk later because the documentary is focusing on them. So Eva, are you able to speak what the Girls Advocacy Alliance is doing in Kenya? Eva, are you there?
Thank you, Jennifer. So the Girls Advocacy Alliance is working in Kenya, and it is a partnership program that is led by TS Homes. We work in partnership with Plan International, and the two organizations have other implementing partners that are working with regard to addressing issues, as I had mentioned, on commercial sexual exploitation of children, child trafficking, economic empowerment, as well as also addressing child marriage. So with regard to the counter trafficking and prevention of of children. We have worked both at national level and at county level, and we also have organizations that are still within the terrorist homes and the GAA partnership that looking at both advocacy and lobbying, and that is what COVAU's strength is in, with regard to just looking at how we look at issues of pushing policy, pushing laws, and also pushing for the enforcement and implementation of laws and policies that prevention of trafficking in children, as well as sexual exploitation of children. The same, we have organizations like ANPAN, which is also part of the general GA Terror Des Homes partnership, and they are funded for purposes of service provision on seeing how prevention of the same can be done, as well as pushing also and looking at advocacy for the same. The Girls Advocacy Alliance is implemented in Nairobi at national level, as well as within organizations that are working with urban slum communities. And we are working in Kisumu and its environs, as well as Kwale County, where we have the biggest project that is supported by COVAU in partnership with Terrorist Homes. In Kwale, we are supporting 315 girl advocates who are actually beneficiaries of the project. And this has been the result of either having been rescued or come into the project for purposes of prevention and protection, as well as due to the response towards CSEC, child trafficking, as well as looking at opportunities for economic empowerment. The programs work in partnership with actors. That is mainly the government, communities. We are working with other like-minded civil society organizations, as well as all working in partnership with the private sectors, especially to enforce and push laws that look at fair work practices for girls. And all these interventions altogether work towards just reducing the vulnerabilities that may expose girls to and young women to issues or situations where they are prone to violations, especially with regard to exploitation and trafficking. And as you're aware, both commercial exploitation of men, as child trafficking, as well as also looking at all the other violations that come in with regard to gender, how correlate their intervention when it comes to that. Jennifer? Jennifer, you're mute.
Sorry, I'm trying to share the screen.
Okay.
I think it is the transporting a child from his origin or destiny to a known place without his consent or parents' recognition.
Actually, I'm a Karamojong by tribe, and when I was in Karamoja, do you know some children can be trafficked by your aunt, by your uncle, or your dad, or someone else. But for me, I was trafficked by my aunt. She told me, let's go to Kampala. You're going to study. After all that, my mother never had money to pay for me school fees. She decided to let me go. But when I reached to Kampala, my aunt never also had money. She decided to take me to Owino market to sort beans, whereby at that age I could not manage. They could give me a big sack and told to sort the beans and the groundnuts at 5,000. And by then I was 8 years. When I could not manage to sort, I could not manage to clean the beans very well, and the boss could abuse me. I was like, when like the back can pain me. So in the evening they could give me that 5K, then go home, then I give it to my aunt. After giving it to her, she could not even send it to my aunt, because in a month I could make like 100,000. And I thought that she will send the money to my mom, but she could not send. She used to use the money like for her own, and she buys her own things. She could only give me 1,000 to eat or to find something to eat. But when I reached, I'm fed up of sorting beans, I'm like, how can I do this at this tender age? So I decided to go to the streets of Kampala. Then I spent a month, because in Karamoja I was in Fitu. I spent a month on the streets, begging, starving everything there from the street, getting food, anything which to improve on my status. So the drilling members came on the street. They were like, you guys, how are you? I was like, I'm fine. Because in drilling social workers, there was a Karamojongo in my tribe, and I talked to her. Even I narrated my story to her. She was like, can you please show me where you stay?
The situation of child trafficking, I will approach it starting from the situation in Uganda. Currently has close to 70% of a young population. And with that, predominantly, the young people are looked at as a source of income, as a source of survival for the families. And because of that, then the children are pushed to look at generating income, generating a revenue, a sort of revenue for the families. Right from the past, the cultural systems always put that the boys had to go herding while the girls had to go digging. All that was for the goal of having food into the home. And with the global changes that are happening, we are seeing that even now, as families don't necessarily have land to cultivate or animals to look after, they're looking for alternatives. And what we see is that children are easily being sold off into slavery. They're easily being handed over. They're easily being trafficked out because of the poverty situation and because of still the fact that they look at the child as a source of income.
I'm 18 years old. 1 year I was working in a certain bar. And this bar, she was a lady who employed me. I was working as a waitress in that bar. So at first she used to pay me, but as time went on,
something like 2 weeks, she stopped paying me. She told me that in order to get my salary, I have to sleep with her clients. In that, when you don't sleep with the clients, you don't get any payment. So you have to behave well, speak to the clients, and as you sleep with them, that's how you gain your salary. It depended. There was no actual money. Some will pay you something like 10K, others 15K, something like that, but it was not negotiable. After that, I was recruited by a certain man. That man also came in that bar as a client. So he saw me. He asked me that, how are you paid here? Something like what? The experience I've been going through. I told him that at first I was being paid, but right now I'm not paid anything because that man saw me talking to my boss as I was taking to him that drink. After that, I asked for money from him, and I told him, don't you need anything like something like that? He told me no. And he asked me that, is that the only thing you do to earn a living? I told him I was vulnerable. I had dropped out of school. My parents had separated by then. So we went separate ways. So to earn a living, I had to sleep with these men to get something to eat, to live my life. So this man helped me out. He gave me his number, and I contacted him. He told me the place where I should meet him, but at first I was scared, thinking that he might do the same thing to me, because that's how the other woman came into my life. He was so sweet.
I had a boss, and I was working in the guest house as the hand washer. Then after, when I was washing the clothes, I was so people, and they were men. So when I was working there, at first they used to pay me little less money, and after they told me that I'm going to be used as a sex victim in advance of paying me. So when I had a man, I was working with that man, and that man was working with me. Then that man told me that to pay you, you have to first sleep with me. Then after I said that, how can I do that thing? Because I wanted money. I had nothing to do. I wanted money. So then that man started using me. I used to go there in the morning to wash clothes. Then after, when I was washing clothes, that man could come in the evening. And if I go there to ask him that I want my money, he just uses me. He tells me that you just go there in the bedroom, I'll find you there. Then after, that man used to use me as a sex victim. I was the one who was getting money because my mother told me when I sat my P7, I had nothing to do because school fees was not there. I had to stop there, not going to school. Then my mother told me that you go there and start working such that you can get money to provide here at home.
Uganda Youth Development Link is an organization that is mainly working with out-of-school young people. We started in 1993. And our main focus is the vulnerable young people who are out of school. And the issues that we've been mainly focusing on issues to do with the sexual exploitation of children, how do you prevent HIV/AIDS among children, among the young girls and women. Then we have programs to do livelihood skills training for the young people out of school. We have programs with skilling, with entrepreneurship. So our main programs, as you see, the focus is mainly on how do we build the resilience, how do we build the skills of the young people who are out of school, and that is our main focus point as an organization. We did a report as an organization in 2011 where we showed that we had had an increase of children who had been sexually exploited from 12,000 to 18,000. That's in 2011. But again, we also see the report that came out that was done by Ministry of Gender on violence against children in 2018. It was also showing us that 1 in 3 girls and also 1 in 6 boys who are aged between 18 and 25 years had faced some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. And 11% of the girls who were interviewed at the time had faced some form of violence in their lifetime.
The push factors at the household level, for example, domestic violence, is one of the factors that has led to so many cases, to so many children being driven out of the family setup. And yet we believe that children should be in families, being the basic units. But the situation at the family level is not all that good in some of the families. And we're seeing children being driven from the family setting, coming to the streets in the city or any other places apart from the family setup.
Child exploitation is a growing challenge in East Africa. Now, in the East African countries, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, that is a crossbook where all the East African countries are actually a source of children that are being trafficked. They are transit routes and they are also destinations of children. So the issue of child exploitation, particularly child trafficking, is a key problem in East African countries, and it's something that we feel must be addressed and now.
When UNDPC noted that Uganda on a daily over 50 girls move out of the country to be exploited, to be trafficked out of the to the UAE. And when we come back here, commercial sexual exploitation of children is rampant. There are those spots that we know in Kampala, in the suburbs of Kampala, where if it's 100, over 50 or 55 or 60% of the girls in those suburbs are exploited sexually. Why? Because they are trying to fend for a living and they are trying to survive, maybe seek for shelter, seek for food, seek for basic needs, and at the end of the day, it shoots the sexual exploitation trend within Uganda.
Despite the fact that there are great interventions by government and non-state actors, we are seeing that violence against children, the cases are increasing, but it could be that reporting is also faring well. It might not be that the cases are increasing, but because the reporting mechanism has been strengthened, in that we have different actors that are reporting cases of child exploitation.
And we have seen that the children have been trafficked internally in the country, but of recent we are seeing now children from Uganda being taken across the borders and into Kenya. So the situation manifests as cross-border trafficking, where children are coming from Uganda and cheap labor in Nairobi for housemaids. And other forms of labor. We are seeing the albinos in Tanzania being suitable for witchcraft and so are trafficked for their organs, their body organs. We are seeing very many other children who are unaccounted for, who keep on disappearing at different points. And all this we are anticipating are a result of child trafficking.
In the slum areas, some of them have been domestic workers before. When they transition to sexual exploitation, they go to slum areas. And so slum areas have characteristics of crime, out of juvenile delinquency, out of challenges then girls face. And because they have no livelihood, or for them to be able to earn a decent living, they end up selling their bodies or to sell services to people who are willing to serve them, who are willing to give them some money. Sometimes it could be monetary, sometimes it could not be even monetary, it could be non-monetary. And that's the challenge, because at the end of the day, these girls are being exposed to vices, to very big problems, that especially sexually transmitted infections, teenage pregnancies, issues of STIs, issues of HIV, and these are critical issues that really need to focus on in terms of reproductive health of these young girls is concerned.
Rahab Uganda for the past 13 years has been responding to this issue of commercial sexual exploitation, and we should acknowledge that so many have been rescued. When we talk about this rehabilitation home where I'm right now, over 300 girls have been rescued, have been withdrawn, reached to, and over, I can say, 300 have passed through the home, and they've been resettled, rehabilitated very well. Most of them have joined university, most of them have joined vocational school, most of them are in school right now as we speak. So the rescue, the withdrawal interventions have done a lot in curbing commercial sexual exploitation. But also Rahab Uganda has worked so much with the families. How do we empower the families to protect their children? Because we know every child has at least a family. So we parents, how do we protect our children from being victims of commercial sexual exploitation? How do we try to maintain the safety of our children? So we have worked closely with families, especially the families of the survivors that we have worked with, to avoid this repeated cycle of exploitation, but also working with the community structures like the local council leaders, schools, community groups, youth groups, through advocacy campaigns, awareness-raising campaigns, to talk about this plight of commercial sexual exploitation.
Children, we consider them as the key champions of ending child exploitation, not only in Uganda, but even in the other countries where Tourism Netherlands operates. We consider them as the voices of their fellow children. So we work with the children, we support them, we give them the necessary child-friendly information, that they reach out to the communities, they talk to fellow children, they talk to their parents. In some of the schools, we have child protection clubs that were initiated by the children that are attached to our partner organizations. So these clubs reach out to fellow children with the necessary information. They give peer support to each other. So yes, we feel the children, especially when we involve them in everything that we do, they are the key voices for the protection of fellow children.
We have had child rights clubs in various schools in those districts. We have also gone ahead to have children's camps, which are more of empowerment, advocacy empowerment camps, and we have had child parliaments, children parliaments, where we have had legislators come and listen to the children debate and also speak to the children, and later on take the issues that the children have brought to the parliament, to the floor of parliament. We have had even children meet with the deputy speaker and also the legislators in the chambers, in the speaker's chambers, and are able to articulate the issues that have come up as a result of the various meetings that they have had.
Probably it is something that we all ought to put in the children that we have, all our children, to help them know their worth, to help them know that they are children worth, and they are valuable, they have that value within them. So they should avoid going with any person, looking out for those petty things, and avoid strangers, because strangers usually exploit children.
The girls now we are engaging them quite well, because one of the issues that we value a lot is the issue of child participation. How can they participate in the programs, in the designing of the programs, in implementing the programs, and even evaluating the programs? It's very keen as far as we are concerned, child participation. And here is that we are focusing a lot on the issue of the girls advocacy group. We have what they call that Girls Advocacy Group, which has been formed for 2 years, 3 years. They've been undergoing a series of trainings, in terms of resilience, in terms of coping with the trauma, coping with stress, public relations, how do you communicate, with peers. So these girls have also been now ambassadors themselves, who have gone through the challenge of being sexually exploited, but also able to talk to their fellow girls. Sometimes even reach out to the boys.
In Uganda, we have made several efforts to ensure that we can be able to protect, secondly prevent, and then also prosecute, and then have partnerships. And currently what we have in the forms of partnerships and also as prevention and protection is we have the Sauti 116, where if you have any form of abuse to a child, whether it is child trafficking or any other forms of violation against the child's rights, you're able to call that number, and the team, the ministry is able to assign probation officers and officers of the law to ensure that the child is protected, withdrawn, and and receives all the justice that they need.
It's like the government should at least construct rehabilitation centers for those children on the streets, and also take them back to the school. Because when some of them are kidnapped, so they end up going in different places where they end up going to the streets, they end up joining bad groups like that. At least create awareness about child trafficking. Like when someone is trafficked, ought to state strict laws against child trafficking.
The children out there, I'd like to encourage them to keep on advocating for their rights, to keep on fighting for them, because we'll thank the UNCRC and other organizations which are taking part in ensuring that everything goes well on the part of children. So the children themselves should take part in ensuring that things go well in them by fighting for their rights. They should know how to stand and how to say no when they feel like people are trying to neglect them or not to give them the right that they deserve.
The message I would give to the parents is that they should not relax. It's their responsibility to raise their children. Responsibility. Their children are protected and are provided for.
Michelle.
Thank you very much for the documentary, Jennifer. It was made possible by the collaboration between Toto News and Dwelling Places. So as we take in all that, I'll start with a few questions. The first question will be directed to Anita and Eva. But before I actually start on it, I'd like to remind all of you that we have a chat function, and we also have the Q&A section. We also have the same feature on Facebook. So if you have any questions come up during this discussion, please feel free to include them, and we'll get to them as we continue. So Anita and Eva, the documentary greatly exposes the situation in Uganda. Is the situation presented in the documentary similar to what is happening in Kenya, or is it isolated to just Uganda? Anita, please go first.
Thanks very much, Michelle. I think the documentary really shows that trafficking is not only a Ugandan problem, but it is indeed a regional problem. Most of the countries within the region are sources of victims of trafficking and sources of children trafficked, children who are trafficked for various forms. I think the documentary also has really showed us that people are vulnerable due to very many circumstances, and those vulnerabilities are not only unique to to Uganda, but they're also quite visible in very different contexts within the region. Of course, we know, for example, the issue of albino children is particularly rife in Tanzania, maybe Malawi as well, though not in East Africa. But that is not unique to Uganda as well. So there are cross-cutting issues that really show that people become, when people and particularly children become vulnerable due to very many reasons, then they're susceptible to human trafficking.
Okay.
Michelle?
Yes. Eva, could you highlight the situation in Kenya? What similarities does Kenya have to the situation in Uganda, and what, if any, is different in the situation in Kenya to the situation in Uganda?
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Anita. Actually, the situation, as has been alluded to, is the same. We have had incidents and cases and a lot of child trafficking, as well as sexual exploitation of children for commercial purposes, happening in very many areas within Kenya, especially we have this happening within the hotspots, the coastal region in Nairobi, Nyanza region, actually areas where we have a way out, or where we have sort of cross-border, or there's a border, and it is easier for trafficking to happen. There are many factors that have been highlighted in the video, and also these are similar to what we have in Kenya, especially both at institutional level, the kind of policies and laws that we have. Sometimes the mechanisms that are in place have not been strengthened enough, so that there's that continued and collaborative response with regard to countering issues of child trafficking, and that has come out well. Also, as much as, yes, we have key government ministries and various sectors that have brought out various laws and policies, the enforcement is somewhat similar, where we really have there's need for continued and more interventions that can actually lead towards prevention of trafficking and sex trafficking. At individual and family level, poverty is key. We have quite a number of households in Kenya that are not very, they're really below the poverty line. And so what happens is that the children in these families, or the young people in these families, become more and more vulnerable, and they end up either going to other places to work, or they're even exploited because of their various even disabilities. Apart from albinism in Kenya, we have also seen where children who have physical disabilities being exploited for purposes of either begging or just getting something, or even being employed as minors to do domestic work. And with that, you find that they're not necessarily what their home area, they are actually taken to other places without even the consent of their parents, or even if it is done, the child's consent is not there. We have had instances where we even have other emissaries and even relatives doing the same. Discrimination based on whatever situation that a child is facing, a person who has been trafficked is facing, basically put them even more at a position of being more vulnerable towards trafficking. So yes, we have child trafficking in Kenya, and even we have seen that children have also been trafficked for purposes of sexual exploitation in other places. And there's even there has been database that we have been working in partnership with the other members of the Stop the Traffic Kenya, where we were able to even highlight some of the hotspots and highlight cases that had been reported with regard to trafficking. And this happened on a daily basis. So what I would actually call and ask most of the teams and people who are listening to this is to be more vigilant in terms of even reporting and just strengthening and seeing how we can be able to, leverage with various sectors and actors for purposes of enhancing how we respond to trafficking. So it is not only isolated to Uganda, it is a East Africa problem, it is a global problem, it is a Kenya problem. Yes.
You've called out people who are listening to also discuss and understand that this is a regional problem, not only a Kenya or East Africa or even African problem. It's, I think, a global problem. But
yes.
I'll take that and also include what was highlighted in the documentary, the definition of child trafficking. I'll pose this question to all the panelists, and I'll start looking for responses from Damon. So, do you believe that child trafficking and CSEC rates continue to increase because of lack of awareness amongst these, or what role do you believe awareness of CT and CSEC plays in the fight against human trafficking? Damon?
Thank you very much, Michelle, for the question. The question you ask is quite interesting. Is it because of lack of sensitization that CSEC and child trafficking thrive, or people continue to take advantage? I will say yes and no. One, because as much as we continue to sensitize the communities, which I believe to a large extent we have tried our level best as both as CSOs and government. We have not done enough because we need to get the message as far as possible. We still have a lot of message sending to the different levels. But what, in my own experience, what I have been able to see is that the engagement, when we internalize and see how the trend of trafficking is happening, and we are able to share the trends and do the community sensitization on how they do the community on how the trends are and what people need to look out for, all the material we have produced as CSOs, as government, that is saying, look out, these are the key things you need to look out, these are the trends that need to happen. We need to understand that the trends and the traffickers also are advancing and keep on changing their strategies, and it's just continuous awareness that needs to happen.
There's a request that you switch on the video because there are people watching on YouTube and they're seeing blank screens.
Okay, I'll do that, but just that it may make the internet a little slow. So there is, as I was saying, there is as much as we try to engage and share with the communities about the trends of child trafficking, how it manifests, and how people are engaged and brought and are victims, end up being victims. This continue changing every time. The traffickers keep on changing the trends. And so the sensitization is never enough. We always need to look for new material. We always need to be able to be fast, be ahead of the traffickers and know what the trends are, and be able to let people know that this is what is happening. These are the new trends. This is how they're doing it. And so the sensitization is a continuous process. It is never enough. We're never enough. And because of that, you end up seeing that there are increased numbers of people being trafficked and people being engaged in commercial sex exploitation. Not necessarily because we're not doing sensitization, but it's just that the trends in child trafficking and exploiting of children keep on changing depending on the community. And remember, the way it manifests will differ, but the end result, the exploitation, is usually the same.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Damon. that's the questions are still streaming in. So I'll give more time to you, the participants, to share your questions. In the meantime, we'll continue to Anita and Eva. Do you have any awareness creation activities that you as COVO and ASRN conduct within your communities or within Kenya? And if so, is there any way that some of the participants can easily access some of what you do? Anita?
Thanks very much, Michelle. As ESCRN, we really do not undertake awareness creation activities. Our work has been a bit more focused. Maybe start my video, sorry. Our work has been a bit more focused on the policy level. So we have worked or partnered with national civil society coalitions such as Stop the Traffic, UCATIP, Dwelling Places, towards having these coalitions address issues around human trafficking within the different countries. Our work also has more focus around policymakers, either at the East Africa Legislative Assembly or at the Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, or various other African Union platforms where we could raise such issues. So in regard to awareness creation, we do work with, STT, Stop the Traffic Kenya, Uganda Anti-Human Trafficking Network, IACSOF, towards, building capacity of these coalitions to engage policymakers at the national level, to be able to address issues of human trafficking. Currently, what's really we are pushing for is if we could have a harmonized law trafficking within the East African region, because, of course, if you're aware that the East Africa Legislative Assembly is there's currently a bill on human trafficking, and so we've been working with national coalition partners to be able to harmonize this legislation to reflect, national level registrations on human trafficking to reflect this bill. So that is at the extent of our awareness program.
Thank you very much, Anita. I'll take one question from the participants. I think this one would go to Damon and Jennifer. But why did we did we choose to have the documentary focus on Uganda specifically? Why not highlight the documentary and cover East Africa, for example, or cover Kenya? Why choose Uganda?
Well, I think Jenny can add on to the answer, but the program that you spoke of earlier on, the Girls Advocacy Alliance, has been under the Terrorism Home, the TDH, has been working in Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia, specifically this program under child trafficking and safe migration. And Uganda, being one of the partners in implementing this program, we work with East Africa Child Rights Network, and part of our conversation was that we needed to have a documentary that can be able to capture the voices of the children in Uganda, but also be able to capture the initiatives, the CSOs. But we also wanted to showcase what the GAA program in Uganda is able to achieve, and what the voices are, and highlight the issues just as we had seen them. So I know, and probably Fresha or Anita can add on to this. This was specifically capturing what The partners you saw being portrayed there, dwelling places, UTEL, Uganda Youth Development Link, and Rahab Uganda. These are the partners that are with TDH under the Girls Advocacy Alliance, and we're implementing the program together. So as we get to have this week of July, and as we look forward to the day when we commemorate the day of against trafficking in persons, we wanted to show that something is being done. And I think I'll leave for the rest to add, if I've left out any.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Damon. Yeah, that was right. So ideally, we are planning to do a documentary for each country. So we started with Uganda, but with COVID-19, it has really in 4 countries. So we are working on the Kenyan one. I'm hoping 2 weeks from now we'll be premiering the Kenyan version of Beyond and Within, the Kenyan one. But we'll communicate soon. But we are working towards finishing up the Kenyan version, and we premiere it probably not this week, probably the other week. And but we are hoping we can do for every country and do one for the region. But yes. That's a good question, but we are working for the rest of the country. So stay tuned for the next one. We are going to share the details.
As mentioned when we started out, we're going to be with you for a few weeks in this journey as we anticipate the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. Sorry, Anita, for cutting you short, but I have another question that I know is up your alley. This one is from Ruth Juliet. She asks that with COVID-19, is there an upsurge of children on the streets or children on the move? Is there an upsurge of child labor? And as the East African community, are we engaging governments to be proactively looking out for these children? And how can we also support the governments to reduce their vulnerability? So I know it's a mouthful. I think you can start out by answering the first part, which is there an upsurge in cases of child trafficking with COVID-19?
Thanks very much, Juliet, for that very good question. We haven't conducted any survey to tell us that there is an upsurge. But what we can say, knowing the nature of human trafficking, is that currently families, people have lost jobs. Inflation, I think the latest figures, particularly within the context of Kenya, we saw that inflation has really gone up. We know that when people lose jobs, families suffer violence in the home, and therefore children become more vulnerable due to poverty, because they're the most, children are particularly the most vulnerable because, in such context, they have to also find and fend for themselves. Driving around Nairobi, you would see currently many children begging on the streets, mothers holding their babies on their backs and begging on the streets, in places where we couldn't see that before the current global pandemic. So therefore, I would say that knowing the nature of human trafficking and understanding how it manifests itself, then you might say that trafficking is still happening, because trafficking doesn't necessarily mean that somebody has to be transported. Somebody can be harbored, somebody can be received, somebody can be transported. So movement is not necessarily an element for human trafficking. Some of our partners have actually reported, particularly within the coastal region, that children are actually working in farms so that they can make a living for their families. So, of course, that children are not going to school, and most have resorted to working and supporting their families. So I would say that the current global pandemic has really exacerbated the situation on human trafficking. I would really want that, if we could, really highlight this problem a bit more to policymakers. One of the things that I think policymakers don't understand is this concept of human trafficking, and the fact that you don't need movement, and really highlight the vulnerabilities that this category of persons, children, are going through, and why the issue needs to be addressed. I think the second limb of her question was government, whether the government is addressing the vulnerabilities. I think different governments are trying to address this issue differently. I think that government have put in place priority, which is addressing the health side of it, but not necessarily cushioning families, especially those who are particularly vulnerable. How do we cushion families? How do we provide safe shelters? I think what has become more apparent in this global pandemic is the need to have proper systems. How do we strengthen child protection systems within the different country context to be able to address some of these challenges? So in terms of policies that have been put in place, I would say that there's more focus on addressing the health side of it, and not the addressing the poverty, because also, like, you must understand that most governments are now operating. I mean, the economies are not doing well. And if economies are not doing well, then there are certain priorities, and children definitely are not always the priority in such instances. Whereas governments are trying to respond to the current situation in health pandemic, ensuring that they put more money in stopping the spread. I think much more needs to be done to governments are trying to respond to or strengthen systems beyond the global current pandemic, so that systems are there that protect children. More funding is provided to child protection, child rights systems, to be able to cushion this category of persons. So I would say that. And in regard to lastly,
It's okay. I want to cut you off, but also because we are almost out of time, and we have a lot of questions still coming in, and I'm sure we'll still address some of the bringing in the questions. One question that highlights, this is from the documentary, and I think Eva, you assist us in answering this one. The documentary focuses on the girl child and the situations that she may encounter as a victim of child trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation. Does this mean that boys are not vulnerable to being victims of trafficking, or does this mean that boys are exempt from this vice? And if not, what are we doing as communities to also ensure that we are protecting the boy child against such vices? I think Eva can answer it, and Damon can immediately give also kind of a brief overview from the Ugandan perspective on the question.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks, Anita, for the elaborate explanation. Well, trafficking is not only limited to girls. We also have child trafficking, victims of child trafficking who are also boys, and also other forms of exploitation, including sexual exploitation, where we have had even boys being used, especially for purposes of creation of, films and such like. What I know makes both girls and boys basically, as I had mentioned, become vulnerable to trafficking is because of the many things that we've talked about, factors at community, factors at family level, individual level, all aspects. Even when you go into the streets and you walk into the streets and you see a child who has been used in one way or another, maybe for purposes of economic gain, it doesn't have to be necessarily a girl. There are also boys who are used for purposes of that. However, what I know is that the laws that we have in place, the policies that we have in place, the governments that we have, everything that has been put in place to try and counter issues of trafficking do not only look at the girl child. They look at all children, irrespective of their gender. And also, most of the interventions that we have in place as various organizations that are working towards counter trafficking, we've heard about school programs that are done in Uganda, even in Kenya and other places in the region. They will target both male and female children. Community awareness and dialogue forums that are conducted by various interventions and programs do not segregate who it is that they are going to target. So we have interventions that target both all the community members, and maybe some interventions now, maybe depending on what various programs or interventions want to achieve, will target a certain gender. So boys, yes, do get to be trafficked, and mostly not only for sexual purposes, but also for domestic labor issues. And that is why even the laws and the policies that have been put in place do not say that a girl child, but they say the child. So in this case, the child could be male or female. I think the other thing is that so that we are also targeting all children, it is always good to have like inclusive programs, especially when we know what are the key issues or what are the key drivers that bring about trafficking, what are the avenues, how is it done? As you've heard Damon say, it's a dynamic trend. So it calls for reinvention. It calls for teams to actually think about new ways and new strategies that can be put in place in addition to what is already existing, so that we're able to efficiently address the trafficking issues that face all children. Thank you.
Thank you, Damon.
My camera, I'm sorry, it is now dark in Uganda. Do not.
That's okay, that's okay.
Lights, and I'm equally dark, so you may not totally see me. Please forgive me. I don't know what I should add on to what Eva has said. I think Eva has covered it extensively and properly. But if the person who asked the question, or one of my colleagues, Rogers, did give comment and shared the sexual violence that is according to the Violence Against Children survey that was done by Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, finding that from every 3 girls, 1 girl is affected by commercial sex exploitation, and for every 6 boys, 1 boy is affected. So we did give the balance, and we did share what the statistics are. And we all know the dynamics of a male child coming out to express that they have been violated. We do know that this happened. It's just that we know that the dynamics of them coming out to share that they have been violated and all that, all those dynamics that end up making it hard for us to even capture the holistic statistics. I don't even think we have the real correct statistics. Nevertheless, in my own experience, in our experience as dwelling places and the work that we have done, we have seen the manifestation is varied. And like Eva said, you'll find that the girls, those who are sexually exploited, you'll find that they are more girls who are sexually exploited. But when it comes to child labor exploitation, you'll find that there are now more boys in the labor-intensive exploitation in the plantations, in the tea plantations, sugarcane plantations, in the rice plantations, and you'll find that the exploitation for the boys now there will be higher than the girls. So it varies in the places of where the trafficking manifests. But trafficking is not, it does not choose gender, it does not choose height, it does not choose color. The traffickers just go with what is the easiest for them to capture. And they will engage to ensure that if you remember, one of the things that I mentioned is that the traffickers are looking for people who they can easily exploit, and it depends what their goal is for exploitation. If they're looking for those who are going to exploit sexual exploitation, you will find that there are definitely more girls because of the market area, the marketplace who is utilizing them. But of course, we know that the trends change again. I'm not saying it's cast in stone. But when it comes to now intensive labor, you will again find that the boys are more vulnerable at being exploited. Those who are taken to cattle farms to do cattle herding, and also those who are taken to the sugar plantations and the tea plantations and the rice plantations, I have said. So it manifests differently. And we should not be so quick to saying that this should manifest like this. It is not what we choose. It is what ends up manifesting and what we find on ground that we can report to you. But yes, all children are vulnerable and can easily be trafficked into anything as long as there is a benefit for the trafficker at the end of that rope.
Okay, thank you very much, Damon and Eva. The next set of questions is going to focus on regional cooperation. It's going to echo questions and comments from Berang from South Sudan, Iman Munga from Kenya, and a few of the preset questions that we had discussed. So each of your participants will answer your own question. So I'll start again with Anita, who's had a bit of time to rest up, and who is the regional coordinator of the East African Child Rights Network. So in your opinion, Anita, what is the role of regional cooperation in the fight against child trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation of children? And does this cooperation and collaboration, is it limited to just civil society organizations, or should we advocate for cooperation amongst different actors, such as civil society organizations, governments, private sector? Kindly give your opinion on this, Anita.
Okay, thanks very much, Michelle, for that question. I think I would say that regional cooperation is very, very important in tackling child trafficking and human trafficking in general. I think as we began, we said that this is not only a Ugandan problem, it's a regional problem, it's a global problem. And the figures keep on rising every year from the US, the annual US United States Department Trafficking in Persons report. I think, we have seen victims of trafficking from Asia finding their ways into Eastern Africa. We've seen victims of trafficking from, very many different, all the way from Congo, finding their way into the beaches of Mombasa. We've seen victims of trafficking from Uganda finding their way into the streets of Dar es Salaam. This cannot only be solved by Uganda alone or by Kenya alone, but it needs the regional approach, and hence a regional collaboration in addressing the problem. The good thing is that we have international law is very clear on what needs to be done. I think the provisions of the Palermo Protocol, the protocol to prevent and suppress trafficking in persons, is very clear on what needs to be done. And I think if we adopt a multi-sectoral approach, which means how do we involve civil society in victim protection and victim support? How does government fund victim support? How does government put in place systems, policies, prosecution, prevention, protection? How do governments across the region ensure that the 4 Ps are literally put in place? And if Kenya, for example, puts in place all these all the preventive or prosecution mechanisms, and Uganda is not doing, or Tanzania is not doing, then the fight for against human trafficking will not go anywhere, because it needs everybody to be on the same page. It needs the police in Kenya to share information with the police in Tanzania. We cannot continue operating in silos if you want to tackle human trafficking, because as my colleague Damon had said, this is something that, traffickers are very smart. They keep on evolving, and they keep on understanding new ways of trafficking victims. So I think more than ever, it needs a multi-sectoral approach. It needs regional cooperation in all spheres. Thank you.
I'll come back to the next 2 questions, and I'll invite Damon to give his feedback. So Grace had asked us if we have a regional mapping of the situation of child trafficking, and if not, is it something that we are open to working on? Because she's from South Sudan, and she'd be open to working together with us to do such an activity. And also, in addition to that, Nemo is asking, she's stating that she's aware that there's an increase in trafficked victims from Somalia and Eritrea in Uganda. Is there documentation or statistics of this in Uganda, Damon?
I am not aware of any statistics apart from the refugee statistics that the Prime Minister's office usually has. But definitely, we've had the stories from our sister Nemo about the Somali victims and the different other categories of refugees who are taken advantage of. This is known, and I do know that our police, our CID, is investigating the cases, and the stories have been opened. And I also know some people who are working closely with the ministry, with the police, and also with the Director of Public Prosecution, who I know after this conversation will take up the matter and see if there is something that they can look into that. But definitely, there are very many gray areas for us in this whole trafficking scenario, and like somebody once said that we could easily be just scratching the tip of the iceberg. An iceberg looks small at the top, but what is beneath it, you can never know until you go down there and see how large that iceberg is. So we believe, and in many of our conversations, even at regional level with ESCRN and EHCRN and Stop the Traffic, and many of our colleagues here, we have realized that we are mainly scratching the tip of this iceberg. There is a lot more, and it calls for the partnership. It calls for the collectiveness. It's not a government problem. It is not a CSO problem. It is our problem.
Thank you very much, Damon. So finally, still with the regional conversation, this event or this webinar is the first of a series of webinars we plan to host in the month of July in anticipation of the World Day Against Trafficking on July. So as we begin this month and with this first activity, I know there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of ideas and kind of like an outcome you're looking forward to. So at the end of this month, what is the one thing that you'd like people to leave the webinars knowing and remembering? What is the one thing that you'd expect or would like participants who've joined us today and in the next few weeks to remember and share with their friends or share amongst within their family. What's the one take home that you hope anyone and everyone listening to us during this month will share? Eva?
Michelle, did you say Eva or Ivan?
I said Eva Ruria, Miss Eva Ruria.
Thank you. I think for me, what I would really want is that people get to know that prevention of trafficking, especially trafficking of children and persons also, is a collective responsibility. So that now every person, every stakeholder, be it government, be it lawmakers, be it civil society, be it the community, be it even families and individuals, it's a collective responsibility if we have to achieve all the P's of prevention, persecution, protection, all that. If we have to achieve that, this is a collective responsibility. And I'm sure we'll be able to achieve milestones. Yeah.
Thank you, Eva. Anita, the one thing you hope people take home with them at the end of this month?
I think the one thing that I want people to take home with themselves, I hope I am not only preaching to the converted or to those who understand human trafficking, but I think the one thing that I want people to take home is to be, to be a bit more discerning, to be a bit more proactive, to engage a cross-section of actors, in civil society or in government bodies, so that they may be able to address human trafficking and child trafficking particularly. I think most people also don't necessarily think that child marriage can be a form of child sexual exploitation. So I think if we look at things a bit more broadly and make the linkages with other forms of exploitation, and have in our campaigns to have government also address the root causes of trafficking, I think that would be it's something that I would want people to focus on for this month. Thanks.
Damon, same question to you.
I think for me, the key thing is because this program, the GA program, this specific one is ending this year, and we are more or less in the final stages. What we have been able as partners in this GAA program to pick out and see, and I know the documentary is one of them, and some of the friends, colleagues on the conversation here will agree with me that it's because of this GAA that, for example, many of my colleagues and I were able from Uganda to travel to Kenya and meet colleagues like you, Michelle, Pressure, Nemo, and very many other colleagues from both Nairobi and Mombasa, and even Busia, if I can remember very well. And because of that, we were able to network, to work together, to start conversations together. And because of that, we have been able to see better cooperation between Uganda and Kenya. So for me, this regional conversation, I'm hoping that as much as different countries will be having the conversation of the 4 Ps at our levels, that we will come together to have this regional conversation. And at the end of this conversation, we will have a statement as CSOs that we are agreeing and make a communication to our ministries of East Africa and also the ESC on this state, because this issue, we need to make it catch fire at the level of the ESC. We need to ask the ESC to get involved in pushing policies. Like Anita said, we need this law in place. If we can advocate and push and have this law as one of the key things, outcomes, make the noise. Remember, we sound louder together. So if we can come together, not just Uganda CSOs alone, Uganda, Kenya, South Sudan. I've had our colleagues from South Sudan are here. We need Rwanda, we need Burundi, we need to come together, Tanzania, and make the voice, get one voice, and make our communication clear as CSOs on what we need to have in place for regional cooperation it would really help us so much. I mean, just last year we were able to work together with different partners and get the story out about the Karamojong children that are being trafficked into Nairobi, get the story out and have our government of Uganda and Kenya working together to see that these girls are rescued. But that continues to happen. How do we continue to work together? I'm hoping that this month will spike our conversation to learn from each other and look forward to seeing how we can have a regional solution to addressing the issue of cross-border trafficking and trafficking in our own countries. Remember, we are East Africa now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much to Anita, to Eva, and to Damon. Thank you for being our great panelists and allowing us to bombard you with our questions. We still have a few questions in the Q&A section, but we're out of time. We only have 2 minutes. So I'll take this opportunity to thank again the panelists for their great contribution to this discussion. As Anita has said, we hope that this conversation will reach more than us as actors within the counter-trafficking space. We hope that it'll go beyond the converted, because sometimes we tend to have these conversations with people who the same people. The room looks exactly the same. It's only that now it's a virtual room. So we hope that you'll take this opportunity within the month to share the links to the webinars with your friends, with your family, with people you think would benefit from learning more about the issues of human trafficking within the region, because this will continually be a regional conversation. And even as colleagues from South Sudan have joined us, we also invite you to join us in planning these activities and in ensuring our conversation is not only limited to Kenya and Uganda, but also reaches out to your countries as well. So this session is made possible thanks to the hard work behind the scenes of GEA implementers, UCATIP, which is the Uganda Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons, Mtoto News, who made the documentary, are hosting us here on Zoom as well as on Facebook. And we'll also share the link of the live stream after. The Stop the Traffic Kenya membership has worked greatly in ensuring that today was a success. Thank you very much. Hopefully you're all, those in Kenya and those who still have curfews, hopefully you're almost getting home or you're home. And I look forward to having more conversations with you throughout the month of July. Again, I know I've sounded like a broken record, but 30th July is a World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. So ensure that this month, as Damon has said, we come together and make a giant noise and ensure that by the end of this month, people actually know what human trafficking is, know that it is our collective responsibility to fight against it, and know that we are basically our brother's keepers. Have a good evening, and I hope today was an informative session. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Everyone stay safe.